Welcome back. Today's episode is about your mood in perimenopause, particularly the irritable, moody bitchiness that comes before your period. This is one of the major symptoms that women reach out to me about. Oftentimes, they don't realize that their mood fluctuations can be due to hormone fluctuations in their cycle. So, we have our clients get into the habit of noticing when the moods are occurring, when they are the worst, and where they are in their menstrual cycle. I really believe that it is important to pay attention to your symptoms because they're a way that our body communicates to us. Plus, it helps my team and I better guide our clients. So typically, women experience these mood swings, irritability, a short fuse, if you will, about the week or so before their period. But let me explain what's happening in your cycle so that you can better understand how it's all connected. So essentially, you have the first half of your cycle known as your follicular phase. Then you have the second half known as the luteal phase. But let's break it down even further. So day one is the first day of your period or the first day that you bleed. That's known as your menstrual phase. During this time, progesterone and estrogen are pretty flatlined. They're pretty low. Then, as your period comes to an end, your estrogen starts to rise in preparation for ovulation. This is known as your ovulatory phase. Now, if you do ovulate, then in the second half, progesterone will rise and estrogen will start to go down a bit. But then it comes back up. And then right before your period starts again, they both just decline kind of rapidly. So this is very typical of a 28 to 30 day menstrual cycle. Now, in perimenopause, as you're learning, it's a bit tricky. It doesn't always look that way. Estrogen fluctuates a hell of a lot more, and progesterone production is spotty. So some months you may ovulate and make robust progesterone. Other months, you may not ovulate and you won't make progesterone. Now, you may make some, but it's likely not enough to mitigate the volatile fluctuations of estrogen. So moving on to how these hormones are actually connected to your mood. So estrogen is connected to serotonin. That is your happy neurotransmitter. So serotonin is linked to good moods and a general feeling of optimism. So as estrogen drops in your cycle, so does your serotonin. Now, progesterone, on the other hand, is connected to GABA. GABA is your calming neurotransmitter, also known as nature's Valium. So when that drops or isn't produced in abundance every month, this is very typical in this stage of life, we will not be calm. Okay, you may feel anxious and you may even notice that your sleep is disrupted. And this makes for a very moody bitch. Am I right? All right, so another hormone that I didn't mention yet is testosterone, which also affects mood. So it can affect anxiety, cognition, and it can help us cope better with the stress of life. It also helps us maintain blood sugar balance, which I'm going to talk about more in a minute. But testosterone is another hormone that starts to decline in our perimenopausal years. So let's talk about some things that you can incorporate to hopefully mitigate some of these mood fluctuations. So the first thing I want to just share is that, a lot of women, when they're dealing with these types of moods, they may opt for an SSRI, and that is a selective reuptake inhibitor. That is a prescription medication, an antidepressant that will be prescribed by a doctor, such as Lexapro, Zoloft, or Prozac, right? And now these have been shown to help regulate serotonin, again, our happy neurotransmitter or our happy hormone. But many women want to avoid these medications for multiple reasons and opt for something that's a bit more natural. So this is where your food and lifestyle changes are key, regardless, even if you're on medication, right? It's not one or the other. We should always be striving to improve our food habits, our lifestyle habits, our mindset, addressing underlying imbalances, and so on. So the first thing I want to talk about is your food. So I've talked about food in prior episodes, but I cannot stress this enough. You want to make sure that you're eating enough food every day. I see this so often with our clients. They're not eating enough food. And that's going to really not only cause more stress to the body, which is going to increase your cortisol hormone, which is a stress hormone, but it's also going to cause an imbalance of blood sugar. And we have to be diligent about balancing our blood sugar, especially in this stage of life. So when your blood sugar is imbalanced, it will absolutely affect your mood. So how do we balance our blood sugar? Again, by eating enough and eating enough of the right foods, namely protein. Protein. I cannot stress it enough. In this stage of life and beyond, we must be optimizing our protein intake. So you want to be aiming for 1 gram of protein per body weight per day. So an example of that, say you weigh 130 pounds, you want to make sure that you're consuming about 130 grams of protein. Yes, per day. This means that you may have to start tracking. I know it's not fun. Nobody wants to track their macros, but if you track anything, please make it be protein, all right? The other thing to consider is removing some of the common offenders that can cause inflammation in the body. We want to be managing inflammation all the time, but especially if you're dealing with a lot of symptoms like PMS symptoms or these mood fluctuations that we're talking about. So things like gluten, dairy, sugar, and of course, alcohol. These can all make matters worse. So especially that time of the month where you know that your moods are not good, consider removing them or at least minimizing them. All right, the other thing to think about is stress. So I just mentioned this a little bit earlier when I was talking about an imbalance, or imbalanced blood sugar can cause stress to the body and raise your cortisol. Now, if you have a lot of stress in your life, that can absolutely exacerbate your PMS symptoms, like your mood. So if you know that week or so before your period, you are really moody, you're really irritable, I want you to maybe put this in your calendar, plan it, and think about how you can prioritize slowing down in all areas, of course, where possible. Think about the type of movement that you're doing. Are you somebody who does a lot of cardio or Orange Theory fitness or CrossFit or something that's pretty intense? That week or so before your period, you want to slow things down. Maybe you do some light strength training, or maybe you just go for walks, or even incorporate something like yoga. Those are going to be more calming to you, and more specifically, calming to your nervous system, all right? And that's going to help with stress management, right? So the other thing to think about is incorporating more self-care, like Epsom salt baths. We have a lot of our clients do this who experience really bad PMS symptoms because Epsom salt contains magnesium. That is a star mineral that most of us are deficient in. I've talked about it in other episodes. It is a very calming mineral, and it eases tension in the body besides hundreds of other functions. Now, I also want you to think about finding things that bring you joy. So again, this is part of self-care. Maybe it's a creative outlet. Maybe it's hanging out with a friend. Really take this time before your period to treat yourself really well. You don't want to be amping things up. You don't want to be going hard at work. You don't want to be going hard in your workouts. You want to slow things down. Take it down a notch, okay? The other thing is think about setting some boundaries. If you have a lot of people that are requesting time from you, energy from you, your time is really valuable. Your energy during this time is going to be lower. So start to set loving boundaries, okay, as best you can. And then, of course, you want to optimize your sleep. Make sure you're getting to sleep earlier, creating a relaxing nighttime routine, and making time for rest. When you don't rest, your mood is not going to be good. All right, the other things to think about is your minerals and your vitamins, right? I have talked about this in other episodes. Many of us are deficient nowadays due to stress, due to our diets, due to gut dysfunction, and so on. So we use an HTMA, which is a hair tissue mineral analysis, which looks at all of your minerals or your micronutrients, such as magnesium, right? That's going to be really calming. Many women have a loss of magnesium, or they're taking it and it's not actually getting into the cell to be properly utilized. And this test can also give us insight into which B vitamins you need. But typically, most women would benefit from a quality B complex with folate, not folic acid. So if you're taking one, make sure it doesn't say folic acid on it. That is not the safe form that you want in a B complex. Now, some women need to take a separate B6, specifically an activated B6 supplement, alongside magnesium. So B6 is going to help get magnesium into the cell where it belongs in order to do its many jobs in the body. So many women are deficient in B6, like I said earlier, because of poor diets, because of stress, because of gut dysfunction, or even using hormonal birth control for years. If you took oral birth control for many years, that can really disrupt the gut and cause a lot of nutritional deficiencies, from minerals to B vitamins. Okay, so it's important to replenish these. The other thing to consider is supplementing with amino acids that are specific to supporting your mood. But please note that if you are taking an SSRI, you really want to use caution. So I would work with a skilled practitioner if you are thinking about doing this, okay? And then, of course, like I said earlier, gut health dysfunction plays a massive role in our moods. If you've got gut inflammation, if you have an imbalance of good gut bugs, this can absolutely affect your mood. Now, I want to shift focus to something called PMDD, which I tend to refer to as PMS on steroids, but the official term is premenstrual dysphoric disorder. This is actually more common than you may think. I actually was told that I had this years ago because my moods were so bad before my periods. But luckily, all the food changes I've made, the lifestyle changes I've made, addressing nutritional imbalances and hormone imbalances have really, really helped me. There aren't any diagnostic tests for PMDD. Essentially, you are assessing your symptoms, you are addressing everything I just mentioned: nutrients, food, lifestyle, and so on. So PMDD can cause severe anxiety, depression, and extreme mood changes. It can really disrupt your work life. It can affect your relationships. You may feel extreme sadness, hopelessness, irritability, or even anger. You may find that you're lashing out at your loved ones. And then, of course, it can be coupled with the typical PMS symptoms like breast tenderness or bloating. You may even feel really overwhelmed and out of control. That's how a lot of women explain it to me. And I get it. It's really frustrating because I've been there myself. Women with PMDD tend to have lower estrogen in the early luteal phase. So like I mentioned earlier, your luteal phase is the second half of your cycle. And I talked about how estrogen kind of fluctuates. Well, it could be really low for you. And that's, of course, going to contribute to these symptoms. And decreased estrogen can cause the brain to release something called norepinephrine, which triggers a decline in other neurotransmitters like serotonin, which I mentioned earlier, as well as dopamine. These are your feel-good hormones. So that dip in estrogen can be really problematic for a lot of women. So this brings me to my last point. Whether it's PMS moods or PMDD, which again is a more extreme version of PMS, you may want to consider hormone replacement therapy, especially if you're in your perimenopausal years. And remember, that can start in your mid to late 30s. So a lot of doctors will say, you're too young. But if you're experiencing a lot of life-altering symptoms and you're over the age of 35, you are likely in perimenopause, and hormone replacement therapy may be a really great option for you, besides all the food and lifestyle changes that I just recommended. Now, typically when women are dealing with symptoms like mood swings, irritability, anxiety, they will start with progesterone. So again, progesterone is your very calming hormone. We need it, not just for pregnancy. We need it all the time, and especially as we age because we're losing it. So providers will typically recommend taking progesterone only in the second half of your cycle, which is around days 14 to 28. If you have a regular 28-day cycle, that may look a little bit different for you if your cycle is shorter or longer. However, we have found that some clients need to take their progesterone a bit earlier to try to mitigate the sensitivity to the estrogen fluctuations that are happening in the luteal phase. Again, that's the second half of your cycle. Some do better on it continuously, so they're taking it all month. There's a lot of schools of thought on this. I'm not going to get into that right now, but you really do have to find what works for you. The other thing to consider is the standard dose that is given for progesterone is 100 milligrams. That's typically not enough for a lot of women, especially if they're dealing with these types of mood swings or specifically PMDD. Some women need 200 to 400 milligrams to notice a difference, and even upwards of 600 milligrams, sometimes in a suppository form if necessary. And what many women don't realize that is that replacing estrogen may be beneficial as well. And that's going to help mitigate these erratic ups and downs that you experience in perimenopause. All right, I hope that was helpful to you and gave you some insight on some steps to take to improve your mood in perimenopause. See you soon.